All right. It's good to see you. How you guys doing? How'd you sleep last night? Anyone have any dreams? Do you ever remember your dreams? I very rarely remember my dreams. One of the craziest dreams I ever had, it was 5 or 6 years before I met Jen, and it was a Saturday night, and I had this dream that I was married to this woman I didn't recognize at all. And the next morning, I went to church, and during the greeting time, the lady in front of me turned around to shake my hand, and it was her. And I had never seen her before. I was like, in hindsight, I wish in that moment I had said, I've been dreaming about you. But I didn't. I just sort of played it cool and never saw her again, and good thing, otherwise I might not be married to Jen today. But most of the time, I don't remember my dreams. Today, we are going to spend some time looking at a guy's crazy dream. If you've been with us, we've been studying the book of Daniel, and the first half of the book of Daniel is incredible. It's these stories of Daniel and his friends and their ability to sort of trust in God and remain faithful to Him amidst this incredible opposition and pressure to conform to the society around them. And we see over and over again God deliver and provide from lions and from fire. I mean, the first half of Daniel is quite exciting. And you can find lots of sermons on the first half of Daniel. The second half of Daniel is very different than the first half. I don't think I'd ever heard any sermons growing up preached in the second half of Daniel. We're no longer in narrative literature. So it's no longer stories. No, this is now a genre called apocalyptic literature. And you can guess from the name, now we're going to be talking about things that happen at the end. And two things to note sort of about this genre before we even jump into it. The first is that in the Bible, whenever apocalyptic revelation is given, it's always given to a group of people who are going through severe suffering, through really intense trials. And that's the case for Daniel. The people of God, the Israelites, are in exile at this point. They're far from their home. They're treated as slaves. Other places in the Bible, other prophets, similar situation while the people are in exile. In the New Testament, the people of God are under the Roman oppression. When you think about apocalyptic books, what book of the Bible do you think about? Revelation, which happened in the 80s and 90s of the first century. That's probably when the Christians were undergoing the most intense persecution, being martyred for their faith. And so apocalyptic literature is always given when the people of God are going through really intense situations. And my guess is, anytime we have a room this size, there's people going through intense situations. Whether that's physical or relational or emotional, spiritual, any number of us are probably going through something pretty challenging. And if you find yourself in that place, you're in good company, because Daniel 7 was written to you in that situation, and to me. When life feels challenging, when everything feels like it's uphill, that's who this revelation was written for. Second thing to note, sort of about apocalyptic literature, is that the key feature of it is pictures. It's told, everything is told in symbols. Even the numbers that you see aren't those numbers. They're symbols for other things. This genre is meant to be experienced. It's meant to be seen. It's meant to be heard and felt and tasted. It's supposed to be experienced. So truth is certainly being communicated, but it's not as precise as other genres of literature. And so as we interpret these portions of Scripture, we can't interpret them the exact same way we do other portions of Scripture, or we'll completely miss the point. Let me give you an example. I've probably used this example before, but I really like it. If I were to say this sentence, next week the Cowboys are headed to the frozen tundra to battle the Cheeseheads. What are we talking about? I didn't say the word football. I never once said the word football. In fact, but yet because of all these cultural pictures that all of us know, you all know exactly what I'm talking about. But you take someone who's not in this culture, who's learning English maybe, and you tell them that sentence, they're going to get a very different idea of what's going on. A really strange picture of people trying to lasso others with snow everywhere and people with cheese on their heads or something. So that's kind of an example of what we're talking about. Everything we're going to read in this dream is a picture. It's a symbol for something, and we're going to try to unpack that a little bit. It's picture language. All right, so Daniel 7. Turn with me there if you would. We're going to get into this dream, talk about what it's referring to, and then try to pull out a couple big ideas if we have time. And let me just say at the outset, before we even jump into this, because my guess is as we get into this, you're going to start scratching your head and be like, why? Why are we doing this? It's 2,500 years old from this guy's crazy dream. Why are we spending any time on this? Why is this relevant? Jesus quotes this chapter more than any other in his life. So for those of us who've given our lives to Jesus, who are following him, it's worth figuring out why was this chapter so important to him? And then we'll say, well, then why should it be important to us as well? Daniel chapter 7, starting verse 1. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream, and visions passed through his mind as he was lying in bed. He wrote down the substance of his dream. Daniel said, "In my vision at night I looked, and there before me were the four winds of heaven churning up the great sea. Four great beasts, each different from the others, came up out of the sea." This dream has a very sort of ominous beginning. There's these creatures coming out of the sea, and we're going to get a lot more detail about these creatures. But even the fact that they come out of the sea is significant. When you and I hear the sea, we may have actually pleasant thoughts, right? You may think about going to the beach or going fishing or something pleasant. But to ancient people, the sea was not a pleasant place. The sea was always a symbol for the chaotic, for the uncontrollable, for the mysterious. Short of the few feet you could see down, it was the unknown world. No, you didn't know what was down there. And so the sea was not a pleasant place. In fact, you may have wondered about this at the end of Revelation. It says, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. The first heaven and earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea." Now, I don't know exactly if there's going to be a sea in the new heaven and earth or not, but there's not going to be the chaotic and the unknown and the mysterious and the scary. That's what this is saying. In all ancient, for all ancient peoples, ancient literature, the sea is scary and dark and ominous. And so that's how his dream starts. And then come these four beasts. Now, remember, this is trying to get us to picture these, okay? So try to picture these animals as they come. The first was like a lion, and it had wings of an eagle. Okay, so take two of the most powerful animals there are, and this is a hybrid of them. I watched until its wings were torn off, and it was lifted from the ground so that it stood on 2 feet like a human being, and the mind of a human was given to it. And there before me was a second beast, which looked like a bear. It was raised up on one of its sides. Now, most think that this is, when it says raised up, think it's a bear with like 2 horns, kind of like an ox, and one of the horns is a little higher than the other. It had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth, and it was told, "Get up and eat your fill of flesh." Okay, so there's the second beast. Verse 6, "After that, I looked, and there before me was another beast, one that looked like a leopard," one of the fastest animals. "On its back, it had 4 wings like that of a bird." Okay, now it's even faster. "The beast had 4 heads." All right, so this is unlike any leopard we've seen. Mega leopard. And it was given authority to rule. And then finally we get this 4th beast, the scariest of all. "After that, in my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was a 4th beast, terrifying and frightening and very powerful. It had large iron teeth. It crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. It was different from all the former beasts. It had 10 horns. Now, a horn is a symbol of an animal's strength, of its power. Think of a rhinoceros and its huge horn on its nose, or an ox with its two horns. I mean, that's what they use to defend themselves. That's how they gore their enemy. The horn of an animal is a symbol of its power and strength. And so this animal has 10 horns. And notice, Daniel, he can't think of anything to compare this beast to. The first three, they had some resemblance of something else. This one doesn't. So let's just call this the super beast. Okay, this beast with 10 horns. There's no earthly likeness to it. And he's going to keep going about this one. Verse 8. While I was thinking about the horns, there before me was another horn, a little one, which came up from among them. And 3 of the first horns were uprooted before it. This horn had eyes like the eyes of a human being and a mouth that spoke boastfully. I told you this was a crazy dream. It's getting crazier. So what is going on here? There's these 10 horns. Another horn sort of comes. It uproots 3 of them. This horn has eyes, has a mouth. I think trying to draw out this, there's intelligence. This horn can speak, and it's going to go on to talk about how he can speak. It speaks boastfully. So this would be a terrifying dream so far, right? Do you agree if you saw this? One beast after another, each one getting scarier as they come. But then the scene immediately changes in the next verse. A courtroom-like scene is set up. Look at verse 9. As I looked, thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. Now that's a fascinating term for God, isn't it? The Ancient of Days, the Ancient One, the Eternal One, the one who's seen it all before. And God, he's sort of described in these anthropomorphic terms. And this often happens in Scripture when God's kind of described like a person. He's not a person. He's got his spirit. But so that we can understand him, he's given sort of human-like qualities. So he's talked about sitting down. He's talked about presiding over this court. We're going to get a couple more pictures of him. His clothing was as white as snow. His hair, the hair of his head, was white like wool. Now, white, as you can imagine, is a picture of purity, a picture of holiness. It's still a symbol in our day. I mean, that's why a woman wears a white dress on her wedding day. His throne was flaming with fire, and its wheels were all ablaze. Now, this is pretty cool. God's throne has wheels on it. This is the God-mobile. Now, what's that a symbol for? The God's throne of justice isn't confined to one place. It can move wherever. God's justice is everywhere. Which is what the next verse continues. Just like a volcano, his fire of justice, it flows from his presence. It says, a river of fire was flowing, coming out from before him. Listen to the description of this scene. Thousands upon thousands attended him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated, and the books were open. Now, the sheer number of angels on this scene is staggering. I learned something this week that the largest number that ancient people had a word for was the word 10,000. They didn't have a need for a word any bigger than that. So when it says 10,000 times 10,000, this is absolutely the biggest number that they could conceive of. So that's the scene. And Daniel, even with that incredible scene, is still quite disturbed by this fourth beast, because he brings it up again in verse 11. Then I continued to watch because of the boastful words the horn was speaking. I kept looking until the beast was slain and its body destroyed and thrown into the blazing fire. The other beasts had been stripped of their authority but were allowed to live for a period of time. So far, this dream has these 4 beings, these hybrid animal beast things, coming up out of the sea. Now we're going to get a 5th being. in this dream. And it's described in almost completely opposite terms. Verse 13. In my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man. So not a beast this time. Literally, there was one who was like a human being, one who was as a human, coming with the clouds of heaven. So not coming out of the sea this time. No, now coming on the clouds of heaven. And if you know your Old Testament, the only being described ever coming on the clouds is God. I'll put a couple verses up here. Psalm 68, sing to God, sing praise to him, lift up a song to him who rides upon the clouds. Psalm 104, you, Lord, make the clouds your chariots. So this fifth being is coming with the clouds of heaven. That's a symbolic way of saying this is a divine being. And then what happens to this fifth being? He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. So unlike the fourth beast, when God's presence showed up, that fourth beast was destroyed and thrown into the fire. This one who is like a human was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and peoples in every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. Now, I'm sure all of our Jesus radars are going off, right? Hopefully, we've been taught to, as we read the Bible, look for Jesus all throughout it. This is the story of Jesus, and we'll get back to that. And I'm sure Daniel is rejoicing to see that God is going to be victorious at the end. But Daniel is still disturbed at this point. God's going to bring ultimate victory in the future, but I think Daniel is still thinking about how much suffering the people of God are going to have to endure before that day comes. And thankfully for us, this is an interactive dream. Daniel's able to ask questions in this dream. I don't know if you've ever had an interactive dream. I have not. Verse 15. I, Daniel, was troubled in spirit. The visions that passed through my mind disturbed me. I approached one of those standing there, and I asked him the meaning of all this. So he told me and gave me the interpretation of these things. The four great beasts are four kings that will rise from the earth. But the holy people of the Most High will receive the kingdom and possess it forever. Yes, forever and ever. Okay, so that's helpful. This dream is about these successive kingdoms. But Daniel still wants to know more about this last super beast, this fourth one. So verse 19, he asks again, then I wanted to know the meaning of the fourth beast, which was different from all the others and most terrifying, with its iron teeth and bronze claws, and the beast that crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. I also wanted to know about the 10 horns on its head and about the one horn that came up, before which 3 of them fell, the horn that looked more imposing than the others, that had eyes and a mouth and spoke boastfully. As I watched, this horn was waging war against the holy people and defeating them, until the Ancient of Days came and pronounced judgment in favor of the holy people of the Most High. And the time came when they possessed the kingdom. That was his question. So here's the answer he's going to get. He gave me this explanation. The fourth beast is a fourth kingdom that will appear on earth. It will be different from all the other kingdoms and will devour the whole earth, trampling it down and crushing it. The 10 horns are 10 kings who will come from this kingdom. After them, another king will arise, different from the earlier ones. He will subdue 3 kings. He will speak against the Most High and oppress the holy people and try to change the set times and the laws. The holy people will be delivered into his hands for a time, times, and half a time. This is one of those places where the numbers, I think, are very symbolic. You take a time, and then you take times, which is plural, and then you take a half a time. You put it all together, that's 3.5. Well, 7 is a very symbolic number for a period of time. So this is saying a half of the period of time. It's going to be cut short, is the point. His reign is going to be cut off. It's going to be cut off because, verse 26, but the court will sit and his power will be taken away and completely destroyed forever. Then the sovereignty, power, and greatness of all the kingdoms under heaven will be handed over to the holy people of the Most High. His kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all rulers will worship and obey him. This is the end of the matter. I, Daniel, was deeply troubled by my thoughts. My face turned pale, but I kept the matter to myself. At least until I wrote it down. Right? All right, how you doing? Glad you came to church today? So what is all this referring to? You start to do some reading on Daniel chapter 7, and you realize there's quite a bit of debate about this, as to what this is actually referring to. There are a lot of really smart and really godly people who see these four beasts, these four kingdoms, as referring to four specific nations. The lion and the eagle, those were animals that were all over the Babylonian kingdom, so that was Babylon. And then they see the Medo-Persian Empire, because one of the horns was raised up higher than the other. Persia was stronger than Mede, and so they see the Medo-Persian Empire there. Then the Greek Empire, which was fast, that leopard with wings. Greeks took over the known world in 10 years. And so they see that as the Greek Empire. And then finally, the super beast being the Syrian Empire, culminating with Antiochus, who destroyed Jerusalem in 160 BC. He made a spectacle of the temple in Jerusalem. He would bring all these idols into the temple, bring Jews before them, and when they wouldn't bow down and worship, he would murder them in the temple. Clearly one of the lowest points for the people of God. So there's really, really smart, godly people who think this dream came to sort of its fulfillment in 160 BC. Then there are other really, really smart people who see some of the same sort of successive kingdoms, Babylon in Greece, and then they see some of this is actually still to be fulfilled in the future. Because the scene here is sort of a scene at the end. And so they see some of it has already happened, but a lot of it is still coming in the future, and they tie in a lot of what the New Testament says about the Antichrist into that last horned beast thing. So which one is it? Is it Antiochus in 160 BC? Is it the Antichrist at the end? And my answer is yes. Is that a good politician answer, right? I want us to do one more thing. I want us to watch what Jesus does with this passage, because I think it's going to help us try to figure out what's going on here. As I mentioned before, lots of us, we refer to Jesus as Christ or as the Anointed One, the Messiah. And he certainly accepted that term, but this term Jesus used for himself more than any other is the Son of Man. 88 times in the Gospel. That's how he refers to himself. Right here out of Daniel 7. And then one specific time he refers to this passage. You'll remember Jesus is arrested, and then the leaders of Israel at the time sort of put this little makeshift trial together. And all the leaders are there. You read the passage, the whole Sanhedrin was there, the teachers of the law, the elders, the scribes, they're all there. And they're trying to falsely accuse Jesus. This is Matthew 26. It says, the chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for false evidence against Jesus so that they could put him to death. But they could not find any, though many false witnesses came forward. I mean, this would be like all three branches of our government coming together to try to falsely put someone to death as quickly as possible. Complete injustice. Finally, two came forward and declared, this fellow said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and rebuild it in 3 days. Then the high priest, Caiaphas, he stood up and said to Jesus, are you not going to answer? What is this testimony that these men are bringing against you? But Jesus remained silent. The high priest said to him, I charge you under oath by the living God, tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God. You have said so, Jesus replied. But I say to all of you, from now on, you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven. And you see what Jesus just did? He dropped in a line from Daniel chapter 7. Imagine for a second, next weekend there's a Star Wars convention. And I won't make you raise your hand, but I know there's probably a few Star Wars nerds in here. Imagine you go to that convention and you put on a black mask. And you go up to somebody and you say, I am your father. You're not going to have to all of a sudden like, hey, I'm pretending to be Darth Vader. And if I'm pretending to be Darth Vader, you know who that makes you? Like, you don't have to explain any of that, because these are all Star Wars nerds, right? And they know the whole context. By saying the one line, they know the whole picture, the whole scene you've just recreated. Jesus is in a room full of Old Testament nerds. They all have the whole Old Testament memorized to be in their positions. So when Jesus sort of drops in this line of, I see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One, coming on the clouds of heaven, who is Jesus saying he is? He's saying he's this Son of Man that he's been referring to himself for years now. He's the one coming on the clouds of heaven. So who is he saying that Caiaphas, the high priest, and the other Jewish leaders are? They're this super horned beast thing that is about to be destroyed and thrown into the fire. Now, how do you think that went over? Look at 65. Then the high priest tore his clothes and said, he has spoken blasphemy. Why do we need any more witnesses? Look, now you have heard the blasphemy. What do you think? He is worthy of death, they answered. You see what Jesus does? He isn't saying that the prophecy is fulfilled in that moment, because it isn't. Jesus is actually going to come again someday on the clouds. What he's saying, though, is that these characters in Daniel 7 are types. They're like clothes that different people put on throughout history. When human beings exalt themselves, when they stop living with any sort of reference point to God, they become like animals. They become like beasts. And that's what we saw with Nebuchadnezzar back in chapter 4. He literally became like an animal. And that's what each of these four kingdoms are described. They're described like beasts. Now, what's the difference between a human being and a beast? There's lots of differences. One of the ways you could talk about this is you could talk about how animals are driven by their instincts, by their impulses. You know, they want food. They have an instinct, an impulse for food. They go and have food. They have an impulse to mate. They do that. They have an impulse to find shelter. These instincts are inside the animal. They're driven by their impulses. Now, what makes a human being different? And there's people who would probably say there aren't any differences. But the way the Bible describes the differences is that human beings are made in the image of God. And one of the things that means is that we have a moral awareness. And that we have an ability to sort of overcome our impulses. We don't live impulse to impulse. Those who are mature human beings are those who've learned to sort of control their impulses for the betterment of those around them. So the story of the Bible is that there's this battle waging inside each of us. We're created as human beings with this capacity to live in connection to God above the level of our impulses. And yet, because this world is broken, because we have a sinful nature inside of us, because of habit, over and over again, there's this temptation and this tendency to sort of live at the level of our impulses and our instincts. And Jesus says that's exactly what's happening right now. He's saying to these Jewish leaders, say, you are all united right now to destroy me. To devour me like the super beast that you are. And in that moment, Jesus is saying, I am being the truly human one. This one who's overcoming all of the natural appetites and instincts to revenge, to self-protect. He's laying all that down for the betterment of everyone else. And how does Jesus destroy this super beast? Destroys it by letting it destroy him. That's what Colossians 2:15 says. And having disarmed the powers and authorities, he made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them by the cross. So is this referring to Antiochus in 160 BC? Yes. Is it going to refer to the future day when Jesus comes again? Yes. Was it referring to Caiaphas the high priest? Yes. Is it referring to kind of each and every one of us? Yes. As we fight that battle of these internal impulses and instincts. So, I want to just pull out a couple big ideas, and I wish I had a lot more time and we could flesh them out, but this can be something to sort of discuss and think through and ask the Spirit of God to apply to each of our lives. First big idea is, remembering this is given to people who are going through really intense situations. So what's the message for that group of people? And again, that may be some of us in here now, who all we could do is just to get here this morning. You're in that tough spot. What's the message from this passage? Because that's who this is written to. And I think the big idea is that despite present appearances, and even though things might still get worse, God, his victory is coming. And that's good news for the struggling Israelites. And that is good news for those of us in here who are going through something hard. Or life itself is just hard. Now, it doesn't say that you might not still die in exile. It might not say it's still not going to get worse. It doesn't say trust God and everything's just going to turn out smooth. But it says, as you trust God, you're on the winning side. He is worthy of our trust and of our faith, no matter what it looks like in your life. As we keep our eyes fixed on him, eventually, one day, we're going to look up and see him coming on the clouds, making everything right. And victory will be ours. The second big idea, and we talked through it very briefly, is that every day we either become more beastly or more human. If we're following Jesus, we're following the Son of Man, this truly human one, who said no to his impulses and to his instincts for the sake of others. And he invites us to follow in his path. Because of what he's done, we are no longer slaves to our impulses and our instincts. We have a choice now to follow our human one, to confess our allegiance to him and live in the power he gives us to overcome those. There's a lot more to unpack with the two of those big ideas. But again, if you're in something hard today, I hope there's encouragement that God's victory will win out. It's worth holding on to. And each of us, we look to him for the power to follow in his footsteps and become human, living for those around us. Let me pray for us.